From the Gray Man Briefing, this is a summary of recent developments regarding the Second Amendment, cybersecurity, protests, supply chain disruptions, national security, law and order, free speech, censorship, government oversight, and more.
For the second quarter of 2025, this is Update 13 to the Gray Man Briefing summary of recent developments. Across the country, a federal appeals court in California struck down the one-gun-a-month law as unconstitutional, while a Kansas judge barred warrantless home inspections by agricultural officials. In Florida, a police department began supervisor wellness checks for sick officers, drawing union pushback. Texas passed sweeping bail reforms and updated Houston's license plate reader policy to require justification for searches. Maryland's Baltimore Police launched a tactical drone program, and California's Oakland Police relied heavily on overtime due to staffing shortages. Illinois agencies met the 2025 deadline for bodycams and updated force protocols. Police in New York City, Washington, D.C., L.A., and Miami-Dade heightened patrols and surveillance amid federal terrorism alerts linked to the Iran conflict. On a national level, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 to uphold Tennessee's ban on gender transition procedures for minors, allowing similar laws in over 20 states to remain in effect. The Senate's reconciliation bill includes provisions to deregulate suppressors and short-barreled firearms under the NFA. DHS issued a nationwide terrorism advisory citing increased threats from Iranian-backed actors, cyber attacks, and violent extremism following U.S. airstrikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. The largest data leak in history exposed 16 billion stolen credentials across tech, government, and financial platforms, prompting urgent cybersecurity warnings. OpenAI received a $200 million Department of Defense contract to develop artificial intelligence tools for warfighting, intelligence, and surveillance, raising concerns over the military's use of AI. President Trump announced a ceasefire between Israel and Iran after a 12-day conflict, though both sides reportedly violated the terms shortly after implementation. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz was debated by Iranian leadership and could spike global oil prices and U.S. gas costs if enacted. Let's begin today with the Second Amendment. In California on June 20th, a federal appeals court struck down the state's one-gun-a-month law, which limits individuals from buying more than one firearm in a 30-day period. The Ninth Circuit found that the law facially violates the Second Amendment. The panel applied the Bruin test, concluding that the Second Amendment protects the right to acquire and possess multiple firearms, and that California failed to show a historical tradition of similar restrictions. The law was ruled unconstitutional, and with a concurring judge noting that the decision only applies to this specific statute and does not affect other firearm purchase limits. Also, the Senate Finance Committee released its reconciliation bill, including language from the SHORT Act that would remove suppressors, short-barreled firearms, and shotguns and other weapons from regulation under the National Firearms Act, or the NFA. This would eliminate the $200 tax, registration, and related paperwork requirements. The bill also blocks states from imposing their own registries or tax requirements on these firearms. This is part of a broader $5 trillion Republican-led package, including tax reforms and border security funding, with a target deadline of July 4th. The provision's adoption depends on the passage of the final version of the OBBBA, that's the One Big Beautiful Bill, without any amendment. The NRA hailed this as a win and called on supporters to pressure lawmakers to retain the language. Critics argue the provision would override state gun laws, such as preemption. Moving into government oversight, in Kansas, a federal judge ruled that the state agricultural officials violated the Fourth Amendment by conducting warrantless inspections of private homesteads. The case involved a small family, their farm, and their bird dog operation, where Kansas Department of Agricultural regulators entered the residence during a compliance inspection. Though applicants for such licenses agreed to these inspections, the court held that the Fourth Amendment applies fully to homes, regardless of location. The judge ruled that the regulatory inspections cannot override constitutional protections and found no legal precedent justifying such intrusions. The state is now barred from entering private homes without a warrant, notice, or consent. Homesteaders in Kansas can now verbally deny entry if needed, but avoid any physical resistance pursuing legal remedies later instead. Same goes for anywhere when this sort of event happens. Next, OpenAI received a $200 million indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contract from the Department of Defense to develop and deliver prototype artificial intelligence tools for warfighting and enterprise support. The contract allows for flexible task orders supporting intelligence analysis, cybersecurity, and operational capabilities, with work primarily based in Washington, D.C. and running until July 2026. This is OpenAI's first formal defense deal following a prior collaboration with defense firm Anduril on counter-drone systems. The tool will be deployed in air-gapped systems separate from civilian models. While OpenAI must follow federal and internal data protection standards, critics have raised concerns about the AI's use in surveillance, automated targeting, and mass monitoring without proper regulation. Let's now look at the legal update. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that Tennessee's law banning gender transition surgeries and interventions for minors, including puberty blockers, hormone therapy, and genitalia mutilation, does not violate the Constitution. So the ban doesn't violate the Constitution. The majority held that the law does not discriminate based on sex and is subject to rationale basis review, placing the decision in the hands of state legislators. The case, United States versus Scarametti, upheld Senate Bill 1, which was passed in 2023 and then began enforcement in 2024. It prohibits medical actions that attempt to help a minor live as a sex inconsistent with their biological sex. The court's ruling leaves a similar law in over 20 states intact. Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson dissented, accusing the majority of legitimizing political targeting. The AMA and AAP, along with activists and healthcare profiteers, have opposed these bans. Legal experts say that future challenges will be more difficult, and for now, at least kids in Tennessee won't be forced to change their sex, at least until they're adults. Let's look at civil unrest. The Gray Man Briefing hasn't posted their latest civil unrest briefing, but advised that the hands-off Iran protests have become the dominant nationwide point of unrest, while pro-Palestinian protests also remain widely ongoing. LGBT and anti-Trump protests also persist, but are overshadowed by the demonstrations related to the conflict in the Middle East. Join the Gray Man Briefing to get the next brief on protests, riots, and extremism as soon as it drops. Now let's look at the law and order briefing. In Miramar, Florida, the police department implemented a new policy on June 4th requiring a supervisor to visit any officer who calls out sick. So go to their home if the officer called out sick. The policy was introduced due to concerns about abuse of sick leave and to assure officer welfare, following past incidents, including the death of an officer who died alone at home. While the chief defended the policy as a welfare measure, the local Fraternal Order of Police opposed it, calling it harassment and saying it undermines trust between leadership and staff. Next, as multiple states introduce legislation to ban face coverings at protests, ICE officers have drawn attention for continuing to wear masks during enforcement actions. Supporters argue that the masks are necessary to protect agents from being doxxed and from any personal threats, especially during high-risk arrests. ICE agents are already identified to the subjects that they detain and operate under a strict ID protocol, differentiating their situation from the protesters who, at least Trump and many say, should not be wearing masks. In Houston, Texas, the police department partnered with Flock Safety and adopted a new policy requiring officers to select a specific reason before initiating a license plate reader, or LPR. The change is intended to ensure transparency and accountability, providing documentation and justification for each search. This aims to balance investigative needs with civil liberty protections, especially in a surveillance-heavy environment. The Texas governor signed Senate Bill 9 into effect, enacting strict bail reform targeting violent and repeat offenders. The law allows prosecutors to challenge bail decisions, prohibits public funds from being used for nonprofit bail assistance programs. It also mandates that only elected judges may modify bail terms in qualifying cases. Additional measures include SB 40, banning public funding for nonprofit bailouts, HB 75, requires written justification when probable cause is not established, and SRJ 5, which compels judges to deny bail in severe cases where a defendant poses a threat or flight risk. These reforms aim to keep high-risk individuals in custody before trial. In Baltimore, police are launching a drone program to assist with SWAT operations, crime scene management, and tactical response. The use of small unmanned aerial systems, or UASs, is expected to enhance situational awareness, support evidence collection, and improve officer safety during high-risk incidents. And in Oakland, California, the police department reported overtime hours in 2024 exceeded its budget by $31 million. Due to recruitment challenges and a citywide budget deficit, officials have allocated $72 million for overtime in 2025 to maintain patrol and response capabilities. So while not a sustainable solution, the use of overtime has helped bridge staffing gaps as the city continues recruitment and academy efforts. And it's not just Oakland dealing with this. Nationwide, since 2020, manpower, police officer staffing has suffered across the country. Finally, before we move on, let's look at this last one here in Illinois. Under the Safety Act, that's SAFET Act, all applicable law enforcement agencies were required to implement body-worn cameras by 2025. The law also introduced a revised use of force standard, including a ban on chokeholds, a duty to render medical aid, and mandatory reporting of excessive force incidents. Not that this wasn't already happened, but now they've got some other body telling them they have to do it, even though it appeared that pretty much every agency in Illinois was already abiding by this, except for some not having body cameras due to funding. A statewide review confirmed that now all applicable agencies have now met the deadline for compliance. Okay, let's move into our next brief global conflict. So the U.S. entered the Iran-Israel conflict with airstrikes on Fordow and 2 other nuclear sites with no reported casualties. Original reports said 6 15-ton bunker buster bombs were dropped on Fordow using a B-2 stealth bomber, or multiple bombers, and 30 Tomahawk missiles were launched at Natanz and Isfahan. Fordow nuclear facility in Iran was built deep within a mountain protected by hundreds of feet of rock and reinforced concrete, which made it inaccessible to conventional bombs. Only the U.S. developed GBU-57AB massive ordnance penetrator, or the MOP, which is a 30,000-pound bunker buster, had the capability to reach such depth. The MOP was designed to penetrate through up to 200 feet of earth or 60 feet of concrete before detonation. It, along with 5 other successive MOPs, were carried reportedly by B-2 stealth bombers, as I said. No other country, including Israel, possessed the combination of aircraft and munition necessary to disable Fordow and its nuclear warhead production capabilities. The strikes were initially declared successful after claims that some of the uranium materials, which were enriched to 60%, were evacuated just prior to the strikes. Early reports indicate that Iran no longer has any uranium enriched to 90%, but that the strikes may have only set back their program by 3 to 6 months. Iran responded, of course, by firing at the Al Udeid air base in Qatar, which they were all intercepted. U.S. cities increased security due to threats from Iran-backed cells and cyber actors. Iran's parliament moved to close the Strait of Hormuz, which handles about 20% of global oil shipments, not U.S. oil shipments, but global. Gas prices still could spike by up to $3.80 per gallon if a prolonged closure occurs. President Trump announced a ceasefire. He called the 12-day war over, but both sides violated it quickly after that ceasefire was supposed to take effect, with Israel continuing strikes after detecting at least 1 missile from Iran. Trump blamed Israel for overreacting and violating the agreement. After the initial ceasefire violation, though, both sides tentatively agreed to stop further hostilities. So I'm going to kind of jump around here because I'm reading the various updates from the Gray Man briefing and trying to put them together, make them more current, because they came out as the situations were developing. So another one here, unconfirmed reports claim Iranian sleeper cells are present in the following cities, or states and cities: Washington, D.C., New York, with multiple cities affected, California, multiple cities, Florida, multiple cities, Massachusetts, Illinois, multiple cities, Ohio, Maryland, Virginia, at multiple cities, North Carolina in multiple cities, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Missouri in multiple cities, Colorado, Oklahoma, Arizona, and Washington. So at least one location, one city in the states that I didn't mention, it involved multiple locations where these sleeper cells may be at. And next here it says, following U.S. airstrikes on Iranian nuclear facilities under that Operation Midnight Hammer, cities including New York, Washington, D.C., L.A., and the county of Miami-Dade in Florida increased security in response to the Department of Homeland Security's advisory warning of a heightened threat environment, which is going to carry into September 22nd. So we're in this heightened threat environment, at least until the next bulletin comes out in September. Authorities cited risks of cyber attacks and retaliatory violence from Iranian-linked actors or sympathizers. NYPD deployed additional resources to key sites and enhanced cyber monitoring. DC and Miami increased coordination and patrols, while LA officials added security near sensitive locations. A lot of these places are churches. They put police vehicles outside various churches. A controversial statement by the LA County Sheriff's expressed sympathy toward Iran, prompting backlash, but a public apology and internal investigation was launched after that, and that post was edited to basically, say it was an error. No confirmed threats or casualties have been reported. I think we said that earlier when we were talking about the strikes there in Iran. A federal source also reported that the FBI is shifting resources to focus on Iranian retaliation. And like I said, this includes cyber attacks and plots against U.S. interests. So obviously, we're just reviewing some recent briefs from the Gray Man Briefing, but new updates are coming out frequently and shared to subscribers at graymanbriefing.com. That's gray with an A. So if you're interested, go ahead and join there for more details and insight. Moving into national security. As we just mentioned, the Department of Homeland Security has issued a new bulletin advising that the Iran conflict has increased threats to the U.S., including potential cyber attacks by pro-Iranian hacktivists and Iranian state-linked actors. The bulletin further explains that a religious ruling from Iranian leadership could further incite violence by sympathizers within the U.S. Recent domestic terrorist attacks have already been driven by anti-Semitic or anti-Israel sentiment, and the current conflict may fuel more. Iranian actors regularly exploit vulnerable U.S. networks, and multiple Iranian-backed plots in the U.S. have been discovered and stopped since 2020. Additionally, foreign terrorist groups Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, along with the Houthis, have issued calls for violence against U.S. interests, raising the risk of attacks on Jewish, pro-Israel, and U.S. government or military targets domestically. So this is according to the bulletin. And in cybersecurity, on June 19th, a newly compiled database containing more than 16 billion stolen usernames and passwords was posted for sale online. The credentials span major platforms including Apple, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Amazon, Dropbox, Netflix, Microsoft, and many others, to include financial and government platforms. The data was obtained using InfoStealer malware and is formatted to connect login details with specific URLs, enabling widespread use in credential stuffing, phishing, and identity theft. Most of the data appears to be recently stolen rather than recycled from older leaks. Experts advise users to change their passwords immediately, avoid SMS-based two-factor authentication, so still keep using 2FA, but like with a generator, not just SMS. And also to consider using password managers or passkeys to reduce vulnerability. So that is it for this week's summary of recent developments. Remember that these briefings are delivered in real time to Gray Man Briefing subscribers sent via the Telegram and Signal apps, as well as weekly emails. So thanks for listening, and make sure you remain aware, be vigilant, and stay safe.